Okay, what I start out with today is I kind of look at some thought questions, and this is supposedly to get your mind working around what are some of the things that you want to think about when you think about what can go wrong in the family business and what can I do to correct those problems. And what are some of the typical issues? Well, in succession is who's taking over next. I heard that at lunch. I don't have anybody in the family that's going to take over. What do I do? I sit in my old office building of 38 years. I had renovated it completely 2 years before I had an offer with the major law firm to go to work for them. And I have nobody in my family. I don't have any children. None of my nieces or nephews were going to go into law. I really had no one that was going to take over my law practice. So I knew that it was time for me to find another exit strategy other than the dream strategy of having my son, my daughter, my niece, my nephew, my godchild, something, come along and be in the practice and take over for me. And I knew it wasn't going to happen. So when an opportunity came, I made sure that all my employees had a job. And once they all had a job, I went to work for the law firm, which is now Von Briesen and Roper. And that was my succession planning. Everybody has to have their own. But what are the issues? The issues are, what do I choose? When do I choose? How do I choose? And so many times, and we're going to talk about this, you don't choose. The world chooses for you. I mean, they suddenly say, today's the day, and we're going to talk about how to deal with that. Governance is another problem that many family businesses have. I was discussing a family business at lunch where governance was a dictatorship. The patriarch of the family said, this is the way it happens. Now, we'll give you all titles and give you the impression that you're making a decision. We'll even listen to you talk, but I'm going to decide what's going to happen. And I will be the patriarch until you take me out, feet first. And literally, except for some business mergers and some other things that undermine that philosophy, that's what was there. And I'm here to tell you that's a lot of family businesses have that. That's their goal. Their goal is, I'm going to run this business till the day I die. I really enjoy the ones where they retire and they still run the business. I deal with lots of family farms too, and Grandpa gives up farming and says, I'm turning it over to you. Oh, by the way, we're going to plant this in this field, we're going to plant that in that field, and no, you're not selling those cattle. No, we're not buying into it. I'm saying, Grandpa, you're gone. He said, oh, no, I'm not. This is still my farm. And the reality is a lot of business people do that. And they do that because they can. And we'll talk about how do you handle that. Maintenance is the other issue that I see. This is one of those things we'll talk about in some other contexts, but how do I maintain the family? How do I maintain the business? How do I maintain the structure? I've watched families that had a really good year. Can any of you remember that really good year? Where everything was great and you had all kinds of capital, all kinds of money. And what did you do? Well, you distributed because you went through 2008. You had those hard times. Everybody buckled their belts tighter. And so now you distribute the money. And welcome to 2019, when you're going to wish you hadn't given all that money away. And I say that without any crystal ball that knows exactly what's going to happen. After all, I messed up the entire election. I got 1 out of how many people ran right. So the reality is, you have to understand this. I teach at Ripon College too, and was on a panel. And one of the reasons I was there is because I'm associated with the Republican Party. I don't know why, but I am. And someone said to me, well, what's this Donald Trump guy? And I said, it's just a joke. Don't worry, he will never be there. Well, now he's president. That's how good I am at political predictions. But I can do a much better job at business predictions. I guarantee you that. And I guarantee you I'm going to learn how to use this machine. Okay, some other thoughts to think about. How do owners influence when we talk about the crisis mode? I'm going to talk basically about 3 crises I think you want to think about. And if you got some more beyond that, I'll talk about them. Number 1 crisis is, what do you do with family disharmony? You've got 2 sisters that are taking over the company because mom and dad are getting to an age they want to, they want to retire, they want to move to Iceland and live next to one of those hot spa type places. I always say nobody wants to go to Florida anymore because it's too expensive, so we're going to all go to Iceland. It's very, very nice, and it's very, very cheap, I'm told. I'm going to Norway, by the way, where you never have to worry about anything as long as there's oil. But the bottom line is you have to have some kind of direction. And when family disharmony, I'm dealing with two businesses right now that they're spending more money on attorney's fees than they're going to make this year. And that's only because in one case, a brother and a sister, in the other case, two brothers can't get along. And they're constantly undermining each other, and they've got their own cadre of attorneys fighting with each other over the stupidest things. I really want to get pistols out and put them back to back and say, okay, take your paces and turn and shoot, and whoever wins, it's going to be better off for everybody. I really believe that. Please don't repeat that. But the bottom line is, sometimes it feels like that, and that's called family disharmony. What about market drop? Some of you, I don't know if she's in the room, but yes, she is. Badger Mining Corporation is a company that I know well. I know the sand industry extremely well. I've represented sand companies throughout the state of Wisconsin over the last 20-some years. And it was really nice when the sand industry was going and we were selling sand at $80, $90 a ton. It was just, there was so much money we didn't know what to do with. And suddenly, bingo, they found out you can really use Texas sand to do the same thing they were doing with Wisconsin sands. And it's a whole lot cheaper to move sand in from a pile in Texas to a well in Texas. And with that innovation, with the new types of chemical involvement, et cetera, a lot of smaller sand dealers in Wisconsin are going to go out of business. Bottom line. And if you don't know the sand industry, try the dairy industry. The dairy industry, when it was $19 a hundredweight, you were just making money just left and right. Life was good. You were buying the new tractor. And now, of course, you can barely pay for your overhead with the current price of dairy. The only people that can make it is they're so huge they can't fail. That's what my friends at Rosendale Dairy always tell me. We're too big to fail. And maybe they are. I don't know. I hope they have the friends in Washington that the banks had. But the other side of the coin is the little guy's probably going to make it if everything's paid for. If it's not, I don't know how you're going to make it. I mean, really, unless there's a change in the economy. Well, that's a family business. You have to sit there and say, we've got to look for the good times and the bad. That's the other problem I see of crisis. The final crisis I'll give you is the CEO, the director of sales, and the operational manager, all family members are flying to go up north to go fishing, and the plane goes down, and they're all gone. Who's going to run the company? Crisis. Everybody kind of sits around and looks at each other, and on top of that, they're not only dealing with the loss of the managers of their company, their loss of their family. Father, son. It's a crisis. And those are the kind of things I talk about when I talk about crisis mode. And you can't find many textbooks that have this on chapter 5. What to do when your family dies. That's usually what it talks about, but they talk about grandpa getting old or grandma getting old and dying, They don't talk about what happens when the plane goes down and you got 3 execs on the plane. And that's the kind of crisis planning you have to do. And I'm here to tell you that all families are going to experience this at one time or another in their life. So, are there built-in safety valves in your family business? I mean, how many have a safety valve? How many people have done crisis management? How many have done simulations? No one? No one's ever done a simulation of what happens if the president of the company becomes an alcoholic or is discovered to really have been one for years or whatever. I dealt with a company in Waukesha where they had to tell the president, you have to step down and go into rehab. He said, I can function better than any one of you with I think he used the word a quart of scotch in me. And the reality is the people he was talking to, he probably could. But the situation is they had to deal with it because he had just been picked up for his 3rd drunk driving. He was going to jail. And that was going to have an impact on the company, was going to have an impact on relationships, and they had no way of dealing with it. And I really tell people that you really should do crisis management. You really should do simulations. You should at least think about it. Take a trip, go up north this weekend. There's going to be 4 inches of snow. You won't be able to do a thing. You'll be slipped across the road. You'll be in a ditch for a few hours. It's a good time to sit down and talk about crisis management and think about it. Now, one of the ways you can weather it, and I promise to give you some solutions along the way, is you can deal with an independent board of directors, people that don't go fishing with you, people that are there, that are in a similar business, that can step in. I deal with a sand, gravel, and road construction business. And we did the simulation about 12 years ago. And I said, okay, what if you, and you would suddenly get hurt? And in the road construction business, it's not that unusual that can happen. Who's going to run the company? Well, his first comment was, well, and I said, you really going to let him run the company? Well, he's the best person we have out there to run the company. I said, oh, he's the best person out there we have to run the equipment, but not to run. He hasn't the slightest idea what to do with finances. And what we did is we built a team that came in on a simulation and said, okay, these 3 people, key players in the company, just died. What are we going to do? And the people that we had brought in for the simulation, who ultimately became part of an independent board of directors, ran the company. We had somebody that came in that was in human resources, that knew how to hire and knew how to fire, knew how to find people, and knew the industry. We had somebody else that knew production, knew how to run the equipment, and knew how to take care of it. We had somebody else in finance, and then we had somebody in public relations who could talk to all the people that needed to be talked to about what was going on with the company. It could go visit. And that team was put in place. And then we put together a line item in the budget called strategic planning, because you don't want to call it crisis management. Called it strategic planning, put some money in there so that money was always there to pay for that group if it was ever needed. It's never been needed in 12 years. And now we had to revamp it because some of the people that were on the team have gotten out of the business or aged out or whatever you want to say. So in other words, what I'm saying is there's ways to do it. One of the questions, of course, you have to ask yourself is, do we have enough resources to weather the crisis? So pick your own industry. Pick your own industry. What's your industry?
Office technology.
Okay, office technology. So tomorrow, we put a tariff and no technology can come to us from Asia. It's done. No more of that stuff that's being made over in Japan or in China. Where are you going to get your materials?
We have an American-made manufacturer.
Oh, yeah, but now how much are you going to pay for it? A lot. An awful lot. And given the status of our country, we could do this tomorrow. We could cut off, or they could cut us off. Are you prepared for, or something happens, there's a typhoon, 3 major ships go down. You can't bring the product over. There's a company that I do work for that makes uniforms for football teams. And I always laugh, what would happen if 2 weeks before the season, your plant burned down and all the uniforms burned? Because you don't know how long it takes to make a uniform for, let's figure out somebody that's worth it. Aaron Rodgers. Because he has a certain sleeve design, so nobody can grab into the sleeve, but he has enough flexibility. I mean, these aren't things you just kind of take off you got to build them. So what happens? What's your crisis management? I mean, how do you want to handle that? Now that's a product management, but then look at management of your team. What if somebody on the team isn't there? What if you have to go out and hire somebody to do this? Somebody that, I watch every once in a while, I watch presidents of companies say, I'm not going to take a salary. I'm not going to take one dime a salary. And I said, well, that's really fine, but what are you doing with your books? What are you doing for the person that's supposed to be figuring out if this company can operate? If suddenly the chief management is not taking any money? Because if you drop dead tomorrow, the next person is not going to come in here and work for nothing. Or if they are, they're worth what you're paying them. So you have to look at that, and that's why I say, do you have enough resources? It's not only money, it's diversity. It's diversity of talent, diversity of age, diversity of assets, so that you know how to run your industry. And you need to look at that when you look at crisis management, which is really what I'm talking about. Okay, next. By the way, this is a 3-hour program that I've been doing in an hour, so stop me, ask questions, because I'm going to go faster than I normally would. Okay, tough questions continuing, or thought questions continuing. Is there a family council? Do every one of you have a family council? And the answer is, yeah. I get up every morning, I look in the mirror, and I say, what should we do today? You know, that was my family council for 37 years. Because I was the only family member in the business, so that was it. Now, occasionally I'd ask my spouse, and she'd say, I'm not coming down there. But the reality is, if you do have a family industry that you're building, and most of you are doing that, that's why you're here today, because this is a succession planning, you need to have a family council. And the reason you really need a family council that's different than the board of directors, that's different than the management team, is because it's a different role. The family council is supposed to be there to look at how does the family integrate into the business. It's supposed to be looking at what are the family interests and what are the family needs, not what are the business interests and what the business. And that's why you shouldn't be talking necessarily about business when the family council is in session. You should be talking about what are the goals and the objectives of this family. Better than that, talk about what are the values of this family. You're going to listen to Dick Leinenkugel later. He'll talk to you about what the values of the Leinenkugel family are. Because that's what sustained them through a lot of their hard times, is values will sustain you. Those values do not come from the executive office on the 5th floor. They come from the family council that say, our value is X, our value is Y. We want to put out, again, I'll pick on one of the industries tonight. Their value structure was we're going to put the best product into the marketplace. It may be the most expensive product, but we're going to put the best product into the marketplace, and if nobody buys it, we're going to have to reevaluate what we're doing. But our value coming from the family council is to have the best product. Now, that is not a value of every business. I mean, dollar stores would go out of business tomorrow if their value was we're going to have the best value. They have a different value structure. They want to provide product at a reasonable price that's usable by people, because accessibility is where their goal is. They put them everywhere. It's a different value structure. But the value structure of this company I'm talking about said, we're going to always have the best product. They also had the value, we're always going to be the price leader. And a lot of other businesses thought, that's cool, you be the price leader. But this company had no trouble with that. It's kind of like the New York Yankees. We will always spend the most money for the baseball team that we can possibly spend. Whether we win or lose, we will always have the highest budget, unless maybe Boston beat them this year, I don't know. But you know, it's what your structure is, what your value structure is. So you need to consider that. Also, you need to talk about family turmoil at the family council meeting. You need to have somebody that steps up at the family council meeting and says, okay, what's the problem? Well, Joe's family is running the business. Okay, what else is the problem? Well, that's the only problem. Okay, so if we solve the problem of Joe's family running the business, everybody in the family is going to be happy? Of course, Joe's sitting back there going, just a minute, I won't be happy. Okay, will everybody be happy except Joe? And people are starting to think, if you keep pushing this and saying, well, it's not so much that Joe's family, it's just that Joe did it without talking to us. Oh, so the problem isn't so much Joe's running the business, the problem is Joe doesn't talk about the business. Joe doesn't explain what he's doing. Joe keeps everything to himself. Yeah, that's it, that's the real problem. Well, when's the last time you sat down and talked to Joe? Well, he won't talk to me. Joe, will you talk to her? Well, yeah, whenever she wants to talk. Good. Bless you. I don't think that's a 5-minute warning. But anyway, the bottom line is that you really do need to talk at a family council, and you need to talk the talk and get it out there. It's so important to make sure that you resolve these issues of turmoil before they really start taking down the business. And if you don't talk, you'll never do that. Okay, thoughts continued. Should there be a shareholder agreement? How many have shareholder agreements within your family? How many of them are boilerplate agreements? I mean, how many of you sat down paragraph by paragraph and wrote those agreements with your attorney? Better have been an attorney. Some write them with accountants, but I say, what do they care except for money? But I'm supposed to, I was president of the bar once, so, I'm supposed to be supporting it. But really, you should sit down and write them paragraph. I really get angry when somebody hands me a boilerplate, and I can give you one. You can go online and get one. And get a shareholders agreement. There's plenty of them online. What's that, LegalZoom? They'll give you one every day. Then there's a few other companies, but that doesn't run your company. Nobody is the same as somebody else. And if somebody gives you a boilerplate, I'm going to tell you this right now. If somebody gives you a boilerplate shareholder agreement, say this is the real one, this is the one everybody should use, and they don't take it through paragraph by paragraph, and they don't discuss your family, and they don't discuss things like the educational gaps, the age gaps, the dimensional gaps that you'll have within different kinds of family, you don't have a very good shareholders agreement. Because a shareholders agreement should be agreement amongst the shareholders. It shouldn't be a form that somebody puts down on a piece of paper and has you sign. Now, it's really good if you use a shareholders agreement that's like that and you have a problem, because then we really make a lot of money, because nobody knows what they mean, because they were never discussed, they were just signed, and they have these really neat, complicated formulas that say, if Joe doesn't like what's being offered, Mary has the right to buy him out. She has 60 days, and if she doesn't buy them without 60 days, then all of the other shareholders shall have 90 days in which to buy them out. And if they don't buy them out, we'll hire an accountant who will give us a fair market value. Then anybody has a chance at, about 2 years later, if you follow it all down the line, somebody's buying out somebody else. And what happens to a business in 2 years of family fighting? And the interesting thing is the value is what it was when they started fighting. Because that's what it says. It's a determination date. It's a date that says, I want out and I want you to buy me out. And 2 years later, after the family's been fighting, everybody's been using their resources to fight out this family battle, what's the company worth? A whole lot less than it was. So now the person that really wanted to buy out the company, they had the skills to buy out the company, says, I'm not paying that for the company. Well, the guy that wanted to get out doesn't want to pay it. So now what are you going to do? Because the agreement doesn't say, what if nobody wants to buy it? Now, you can assume it means you sell it to a third party who wants to buy a business that's shown this kind of a lack for the last 2 years in production. People don't use boilerplates. Talk about it, think about it, put it together, because it's, well, I wrote down on my piece of paper here, boilerplate is just plain stupid. And if someone recommends the generic variety, fire them. Okay, now you've been here long enough, so this is my fun thing that I really hope works.
People go to college for 7 years.
I know. They're called doctors.
There's always has been, always will be, a family firm. Oh, son of a... Someday my son will run. Luke, I am your father. Lalo.
Aw, I've interrupted happy time.
That's my name. Yeah, that's your new office now. Whoa.
Do we really want to put the future of the company in Tommy's hands?
Promise me you'll look after Tommy boy here till he gets his feet wet.
Sure, and thanks for choosing me. Hey, Tommy, this is not a vacation for me. I'm out here against my will, so the least you can do is pretend to work. Oh, I can actually hear you getting fatter. All right, it's sale time, so remember, we don't take...
No for an answer. No. Okie dokie. I'm gonna pass. Gotcha, thanks. Oh, son of a... That's gonna leave a mark.
Okay, I like to show that because that's what happens when you don't plan. And you just think, my son knows everything and I'm going to have him take over the business. And it's humorous and it's fun. If you haven't ever watched the movie, watch the movie Tommy Boy. It's worth it. It's a good laugh. until you look at your own business and say, oh my gosh, it could happen to me. Now, the good news is Tommy Boy in the end gets everything right and life is good and wonderful, but everybody isn't in Hollywood, and so it doesn't always turn out that way. And I'll give you plenty of examples which aren't that way. But if you want to feel good today, here's how you feel good. Your rate of return on assets is 6.55% better than any other business way of doing business. In other words, the most productive businesses in the United States today are family-run businesses. You have a greater return on investment than in any other business. Right now, Standard & Poor's, 35% of all the businesses in Standard & Poor's are family-run business. There are 17 million family-owned businesses in the United States. They amount to 64% of the United States GMP, gross domestic product. Now the bad news. 85% are destined to fail. Now, when I say 85% are destined to fail as family-owned businesses, that doesn't mean the business is going to fail, but the family ownership is going to fail. Somebody will come along, buy it up in a corporate takeover. Capital investors will come in and pick it up during the middle of the family fight, get it at 50 cents on the dollar, and run the business. You want to avoid that. And how do you avoid that? Well, you need to address the unexpected as well as the pure textbook model. You will hear from other speakers today. I can sell you many, many books that will tell you the textbook way of doing business as a family. My goal today is to talk about some of those other areas. Again, it's some statistics that should be important. Is only 30% of the businesses make it to the second generation. 13% will survive through the third generation. How many are into your fourth generation? And you know why? I'll get there. Just don't leave yet. You know why you're into the fourth generation? It's because you planned. At least I know one of the companies. I know two of the companies, and they planned. And you have. You got the same you still got the same counselor. You got Dale Feinhauer advising you. He's a miracle worker. I taught him everything he knows. Now, then the fifth generation. What makes you survive?
A lot of diversification over a lot of years.
Diversification of? Business, okay? And we'll talk about that because that's crisis management. Because you get in one little area, what happens? And what happens when you're in one little area with 5 different family members in that one little area?
Any other secret, smaller families?
Well, I can't tell that to my friends at Badger Mining. They have large families, and they probably still will for the next couple generations. They believe in it. So yes, I mean, obviously, mine is this very good success story, you know. One generation, there's nothing there to take over. So I don't think you want to be that small. But the reality is, there's a canning company that I know down in like Sauk City area, Prairie du Sauk area, and I know the family very well. They're in their 4th generation. And they've done it the same way, basic you're suggesting. You only have 1 or 2 kids, and then you don't have to worry so much, okay? So if you want to follow that policy, I'll put it in my book when I write it. Make sure you don't have children. But that isn't necessarily a goal that many families strive. But the diversity is, and that we'll talk about. So the goal is not preserving, this is what I want to point out, is not preserving, and this is where you led me into, a specific family business. Badger Mining, they've diversified, right? That's one of the ways they were able to survive, because not everybody could do the same thing. You said you've diversified into other areas. That's how you succeed. I look at a family right now that I'm working with, and it's an agricultural type operation, but we have a daughter that says the last thing I'm ever going to do is walk in that barn again. The minute I get out of high school, I'll never see that barn as long as I live. Okay, that's fine. What can she do that helps the business? Well, she can do exactly what she did do. She can go on to law school, and she can get a law degree. Okay, she got a law degree. What's that? She now is looking at working for a farm organization as their internal legal consultant. What does that do? That helps the family, because now they have somebody that's looking at the legal aspects of the business. Now she wants to start her own practice. She doesn't want to work for the big boys anymore. the family has taken the money, given her the money to start a rural practice in northwestern Wisconsin, where they desperately need lawyers in northwestern Wisconsin. Diversity. The family's going to own the building that she's in. The family's going to help her get started. But she's not going to go out and milk cows. I guarantee it, you know. But they all share because it's a diverse organization. They say, thank heavens, they diversified out of just pure dairy. They also went into some other cash cropping, but more importantly, they also opened a retail store. And that retail store is doing very well because they called it the right Scandinavian name. So you just got to know your community and know where you're at. Now, there's alternative approaches. I mean, there's different ways of looking at this, but the thing that I want to point out to you is you do need to look at your family and your particular interests. Keep this in mind. The three main reasons that families, organizations fail. The family members fail to understand each other and how they interact. I can't emphasize that enough. It's not understanding the skills and the interests of the various family members. It's telling somebody that if you don't come to work here, you don't share in the profitability of this family farm or this family business or this family organization. What does that tell them? That tells them they got to come work here or else they're not going to get anything. Now, some family members are good with that. They'll walk away and say, that's great. But a lot of them will resent that. Back in 1980, I had the opportunity of going to work on the family farm. I could have done that. I told my father-in-law, thank you very, very much. I'll come out here and I'll help until you're healthy again. And as soon as my brother-in-law gets out of school, but then I'm going back to town. Now, that farm wasn't worth a lot in 1980, if any of you know what farm prices were like in 1980. In 2018, that land is worth a lot of money. Do I go out to him and say, I want my brother-in-law and my wife, I want half the farm? I mean, after all, you know, when mother-in-law dies, shouldn't I get half? And a lot of family members think that. But that's what's very, very important. And I do this with families all the time. You sit down and say, do you want to be part of this? Yes or no? Well, I don't know. Okay, we have an I don't know category also, which means you get nothing, but you have a way in. We'll always keep a way in for you for like 10 years or maybe 5 years or whatever your industry is. And again, I can't create a boilerplate, but keep a way that family members can come in over the period of time. But when the time comes that they don't want in and you can't diversify to help them because they want to become a college professor, unless you want to buy a college, you can't really bring them in the diversification. So then you let them go out and do their own thing, but understand they don't share. They don't share in the ups and downs of the business. I have lots of people that come in to me and they say, okay, we're doing our estate plan and we want to treat all our kids alike. And I say to them, you want to what? And they say, we want to treat all our children alike. Are they all alike? What do you mean? And I said, well, did they all have the same needs and did they all provide the same benefits? I mean, did they all? No, but we want to treat them equally or fairly. The word they love is fair. I said, what's fair? Fair is something that happens every summer, you know. But the reality is fairness is in the eye of the beholder. There is nothing called fair except in the eyes of the beholder. What I think is fair, you may think is horrible. I mean, I think it's fair that you all deposit $100 up here when you leave saying that was great advice and I think you did wonderful. That would be kind of fair, you know. There's not one of you that thinks that would really be fair because you paid to come to the seminar, you know. In other words, it's based upon your view and your facts and circumstances. Don't be so quick to say that what's good for your family is good for your family is good for your family business. It isn't. Fairness is unique to you, and understand that. And if you don't talk about the skills, if you don't talk about the interests of the people in your family. Had a family not too long ago, they went to their daughter, and this was a family that owned a very large trucking business, and she was going to be the heir apparent because by golly, she's the smartest one that ever grew up in the family. She said, I want to be a musician. Her mother cried. Her dad said, no. She said, well, you can't stop me. And he said, well, you won't work in this business then. She said, fine. 5 years. She went out and she played concert violin in Philadelphia. Great musician. Dad had a stroke. She came back home. Obviously, you come back home when your parents have a stroke. She now runs the business. She still plays violin very, very well, but she runs the business. She came back because, unbeknown to her parents, she got her master's in business while she was playing the violin because they wouldn't listen to her and they wouldn't do that. And she listened to herself and she developed a plan because she knew full well that that was a good opportunity, and she really did like the management. She didn't like driving trucks, but she liked the management aspect of it, and she knew she would do that. It's one of those stories that you love to tell that's out there. The next thing you have to understand is families are not prepared to manage crisis. Again, I've already pointed that out. Very few of you have a crisis plan. Well, if the tornado hits next week, what are you going to do? I'm going to say all the movie rights myself because tornadoes don't happen that often in November, but you have to have this. You'll say, well, we got insurance. Well, that's really good. What do you do with the 6 families that are working? I mean, you got 6 family members that are working on your business operation, and it's a manufacturing facility, and the tornado comes through and rips you up, and you're not going to be up and running for 2 years. Yeah, you've got insurance, and maybe I'll build half that plant, maybe replace a third of the equipment. But what about the lost time? You know, unless you got the Aflac duck giving you money every week, the reality is you have to have a plan because some family members are going to have to leave. You can't support on insurance money 6 families. You just can't do it. And those are the things you have to think about. That's where diversity comes into play, because if you're diverse, if you have different locations, you have different ways, or if you make arrangements like my trucking company did, they had a way of solving the problem. They had another company that they had a relationship with. Attorneys were required by law. I was a sole practitioner, like I said, for a long time. I'm required by law to have an attorney to cover for me if I die or get hurt or become disabled. That's a requirement. I have to register that person's name. You know, nobody trusts lawyers, so they force us to do that. So there's something of record that says, okay, this person will take over for me. That's the kind of planning you need to have within your business. Okay, that's the unexpected developments. That's the crisis that can happen, and we talked about that. The last one that takes businesses down is liquidity. Not as big of a problem, and you know, now that it's $22 million that you can pass tax-free. And if you're really smart, you can probably pass about $60 million tax-free. And if you'd like to know how to do that, don't be afraid to come see me because you have $60 million you want to pass tax-free. I'll be more than happy to take the time to tell you how to do it. But the reality is these 2 first ones are really the ones that are going to cause the problems unless you come to grips with them. And oftentimes you have to go outside of your family to come to grips with them. You have to bring in somebody from the outside to help you do that. One of the problems I see with this liquidity here is not so much the gift taxes or the estate taxes anymore. It's that your business owns a lot of real estate and a lot of equipment. Mom and dad die, they owned everything, and you only have 3 out of 6 kids, big families, that want to work in the business. So those 3 theoretically have to buy out the other 3. Do you have the liquidity available to do that? And with real estate and with equipment, that's often hard to do. And again, that's why good planning is important. Okay, these are some things that I just throw in here to talk about systems. And I'll go through this very quickly. I think you've all seen this diagram. Those of you who went to business school saw it probably more often than you ever wanted to. You have 3 elements. You have the ownership, you have the family, and you have the management. Here's where they coincide. That's the operating family. Our family life is very important. Don't ever bring your family life. You notice what percentage your family life is sticking in the business? It's not half. It's not even a quarter. And you should keep that in mind. 3/4 or more of your family does not belong to your business. Now, my wife thinks that this whole thing fits in here and all of that does, but the reality is you shouldn't do that, okay? ownership is always different than family. The responsibilities as an owner are not just to your family. The responsibilities of an owner are also to all the people that work there. They're also responsible to this thing out here called, the United States of America, or the community you live in. You have responsibilities that are beyond when you're an owner. Business, the management of the company, they have responsibilities to the family. They have responsibilities to the owners, much bigger. But the intersection is the one that's critical. And that's the one you build your basic board of directors, you build your family council to do that or look into that area. So I look at my next, and I talk about who are they? Who are your interacting governance people? What do we need to think about? Well, first of all, every business has a formal and an informal structure. How many have formal governance structures? Just one? Nobody has a president? Yeah. Nobody has a secretary? I mean, I think you all, even if you're a sole proprietorship, you kind of have a formal structure. So everybody really has a formal structure, but more importantly, everybody has an informal structure. We have the people within our business that we look to operate our business. The problem is we don't ever define that structure. I worked for a company as an in-house attorney for them. It was about half of my time. And I had a belief that what my role was. I thought that I had lots of responsibilities, and I was doing this, and I was very, very young. I'd only been out of law school a short time, and I really thought that I had a good grasp on that. What I didn't understand is I was part of this group. I was not part of this group. And one day this group fired this group. And you ask yourself, and I did, of course, being a lawyer, saying, how can the informal fire the formal? And the new attorney that was advising them said, would you like us to formalize the informal group and then fire you, or are you willing to go now? And I said, how much is my severance? And they said this, and I said, go, I'll see you. Okay, the bottom line is you need to know how the business operates, and it was my fault for not knowing. I didn't understand that there really was this informal structure. And that informal structure had been existing because the formal structure ignored the informal structure. They didn't recognize that there was a group, in this case, a group of family members that was wondering what this formal president, vice president, secretary, treasurer were doing. And they finally rose up and they said, we have 3/4 of the votes in this company. We're not in any of the committees, we're not in any of the boards, but we have 3/4 of the votes, and we had a family meeting this week, and we're firing all of you. So, don't buy plumbing supplies from, no, I won't tell you that. Okay, the bottom line is you have to understand that. And here's the other things you really need to know. These are things that can happen really quickly to various players. What happens when the husband and wife run the company and they get a divorce? Anybody? Does anybody know?
TV show?
TV show. Good. You'll make money. That's great. I love it. Can I have the movie rights? The reality is I'm working for one right now where the husband and wife got a divorce, and they run the company. I mean, to the best of my knowledge, they're not sleeping together, but their new wife, there's a new wife, but not a new husband, wouldn't be real happy. But the bottom line is when they come to work, they're business people. And they work as business people. They have kids together, and the kids together are working in the business, and the kids together kind of wonder about mom and dad working together, but they come to work every day. You can do it because they were able to separate their family issues, in other words, their matrimonial issues, from their business issues. They had good business acumen. They worked well together as business people. They hated each other outside of the office. At least that's what they said. I don't know about that, but I'm saying, what do you do when? What happens when that sidelight business, that diversified business, becomes a major creditor of the family business? You set up the accounting firm, or you set up the supply firm. Let's say I manufacture brakes, and I need this company to give me felt. I don't tell you how much I know about brakes, and suddenly that's another family member, but suddenly I can't pay them, so I don't pay them, and suddenly that debt gets bigger and bigger, and finally the felt guy says, you got to pay me. And I said, well, your family, we'll pay you when we got money. No, you got to pay me. We set you up in business. Yeah, I paid that back years ago. Now pay me. That's what people don't recognize. You can change roles. What about employee? This is my favorite. You're an employee, you get a salary. You get a salary that should be commensurate with the work that you do. As an owner, you should get a dividend. You should get money for doing the job you're supposed to do. Those are two different checks. Those are two different piles of money. So it's okay for a family member to get a nice big check as the CFO, and another family member to get a very little check as the CEO, okay? That's okay if that's the way you structure your business. What is not okay is to say every family member, regardless of your job, is going to get the same salary. Because what does that do? That says to them, it doesn't matter how hard I work, it doesn't matter how well educated I am, I'm going to make just as much as my brother who's sitting at home supposedly being the company analyst. And I've seen it happen more and more. When the dividend check becomes larger than the salary check, what does that tell you? What does that tell the lazy family member to do? Stay home. What difference does it make? My grandfather used to call that socialism. But, the bottom line is you've got to be careful you separate those roles. And I talked about the supplier role. So you can take a look at that. Now I'm really going to go fast because now I'm running out of time. And I do this all the time. Concerns and conflicts, you can't ignore them. What are the family concerns? They're mostly emotional based. They're usually subject, they're inward, people minimize them. Business are usually task-based, conscious. And guess what I'm trying to say to you is this. Separate your family concerns from your business concerns. I don't get along with my sister. Okay, that's your family concern. I don't like her husband. I don't like her kids. She doesn't know how to parent. Leave it at home. When you're at business, is she doing her job? Are you doing your job? That's the thing you have to be able to separate. You cannot bring your family issues into your business. If you do, you're going to have friction and conflict because other employees don't give two hoots about your problems at home. They want to make money. They want to succeed. And those other business people are going to pack their bags. They're going to leave if you come to work complaining about your sister-in-law or complaining about her damn kids. Or complaining about, Uncle George. He never comes to work. You should see what he was doing this weekend. I don't care. I got a job to do. And as somebody that's worked in a company that was a family business as an outsider, I will tell you, there's nothing more frustrating than listening to family bitching when you're supposed to be looking at the future of the company. Hierarchy, know it, learn it, memorize it. I don't have time in 8 minutes to go through it. But really, that's the structure you should be looking at. And you should understand what your rights are, what your duties are, and what your authority is, both real and apparent. I'm actually going to, because I only have 8 minutes left, I'm going to skip to this next slide, because I'm going to take you through this. And then I'm going to let it, the materials, if you see anything in there that really twigs your interest, let me know. But best business practices for family firms. This is where I would like to end up today. Effective management and control are the utmost in everybody's mind today, and they really should be. We're going to enter, and I will put on my economic hat for a second. We're going to enter a period of time that's not going to be as wonderful as what we've enjoyed over the last several years. Now, some of you have been in industries that have been horrible. Others of you are going to be in industries that will do just fine, even though we're going to have a little bit of an economic twist. We have to. It's just the way the world operates. But who's running the company, how it's being run, how it's being managed, how it's being controlled should be on everybody's mind. You ought to take time every year to do that. I stopped our law firm the other day and I said, what are we going to do? We have a dictator that runs our law firm, okay? And he would laugh if he heard me say that, but he does. I mean, we have a team that supposedly makes decisions, but if he says no, they'll say, okay, no is the answer. That's okay, it works, okay? And I have no trouble with that because he's a benevolent dictator. I wish it was me, but it's not. So know how you run. And by the way, dictatorships are not bad because you don't have a lot of crisis if you have a dictator, whatever the dictator decides. But you better have a replacement dictator if that's the style of management you're going to use. And you better make sure your dictator is benevolent. In other words, cares, concerns, because if he isn't, he's going to be assassinated. That's what happens to dictators that aren't nice to the people. They get killed. It's a little different when you have a group of people. It's harder to kill them all. This means a different thing to different organizations, and that's a point I've tried to hammer home all day today, or all afternoon, is there is no magic pill you can take and know exactly what your business is going to be. You need to think about what you want, and then you need to go find somebody that can help you, listen to you, and devise that. But before you do that, make sure you know what everybody in the family wants. Don't assume because they play the violin that they really don't want to someday run the company. You have to have that kind of an ability. There is safety in structure and preparedness. You know, we as Americans want to have a strong military. We want a military that's prepared. We want a military that can defend our country. But yet we don't have a plan if something happens at our own business tomorrow. It's a whole lot cheaper and easier to design something to protect your business than it is to design something to protect the United States of America. I guarantee you. You know, so if you think it's important to be prepared, I mean, how many of you want to get on an airplane tomorrow that they haven't thought about what could happen? You know, you don't. You want to know that there's an emergency plan. If an engine flares out, they want to know what airport they're going to land at or what they're going to do. Well, the same thing is true when you look at your businesses. Be prepared. Talk about it. Don't just talk about how much money you're going to make or who's going to do this job. Look at the big picture. Look at prepared. Okay, it begins with clear vision. Clear lines of communication. I can't talk about that enough. Talk, talk, talk. So many businesses do not talk. They do not listen. I was at a business not too long ago, and I was giving this presentation to the senior management and some of the middle management. And when I left, this young lady came up to me and she said, "You talk about talking, we talk here all the time." And I said, "That's great." She says, "No, it's not." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "All we do is have meetings and talk." And I said, "Well, what's wrong with that?" She said, "We don't do anything, we just talk." And I said, "Okay, talking is good as long as we get structure and we do something with it. So don't do what they do. Don't just talk, do something about it. And make sure you do follow up, but you have to communicate." I can remember when I was looking at disintegrating my law office and going, like I said to it, I met with all the employees. I told them, "Here's my plan. It's going to take me 6 months. I'm going to find you a job for every one of you. Now, if you find your own, thank heavens, great, I love you. But I will make sure I will not leave until we find a job for every single person that works here." And there were 9 people that worked there. And I said, "We're going to start to do this. And I won't leave until. And if I lose my job at the end, that's okay, but we have a plan." Well, we worked as a team. We worked as a team when we found employment for every single person, and good employment for every single person that was in the you know, the secretaries, the IT person. All of them found a good job because we planned. And you can plan that. Somebody talked to me about they have a business and there's no generation coming up. Well, you still need a strategic plan on how to get rid of the business, how to sell it out. Don't think that someday somebody's going to walk through the door and say, "You know, I really want to buy Sheboygan Paint Company. I can't wait to buy it." Now, it might happen, and if they do, sell quickly. But no, don't. I'm just kidding. The bottom line is, if you don't have a plan, and you should have a plan if somebody does walk in. I asked one of the sand plants I worked with not too long ago, "What are you going to do if somebody comes in tomorrow and wants to buy the sand plant?" "Well, we're not going to sell that." I said, "The heck you're not. Not if it's for $65 million. "Oh, yeah, we'll sell for that." Okay, so then you will sell. So have a plan. Okay, setting up board of directors and advisors. I've talked about creating family advisory boards are really good. Bringing in outside people, going to programs like this are really good. Developing opportunities, diversification, making sure that if somebody wants to take money out of the company to start a toy company, more power to them. We're always going to need toys. And men need bigger toys, as they get older, so there will always be a future as you get old. And then finally, think, study, discuss, plan, and communicate. If you take those last set of words, those last 5 words, and you put them as your model to go forward from today, you'll do just fine. It's 2 o'clock, I'm supposed to quit, but if anybody has any questions, I'll stand up here and answer them. Thank you.